Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. What a great space and what a great audience to address. When asked to do this, obviously I jumped at the chance because there's a deeper story to be told about the Calgary Stampede, particularly as it pertains to agriculture, and we see that we play a big role in the future of agriculture. And so I'll start off with that photo. That might be what people generally think of when they think of the Calgary Stampede. There's fireworks, there's an incredible midway, there's activity, there's a full grandstand watching the chuck wagon races. I don't even have chuck wagons in my presentation, so thanks for doing that. But that's really on the surface. There's a much deeper story with the Calgary Stampede. And I want to walk you through that story because literally agriculture is in the DNA of the Calgary Stampede. And to explain that, I'm going to walk back through the early history of Calgary. I'm actually going to start 8,000 years ago, which is quite a while ago. And so that's a depiction of what the confluence of the Elbow and the Bow Rivers would have looked like at that time. Scotsman's Hill there in the foreground, the Bow River, Elbow River there, and then the Bow River in the background. Where we are situated on the banks of the Elbow have always been a gathering place. There's archaeological evidence that places Blackfoot peoples in this region 8,000 years ago. And this was a natural gathering place because the shallow waters of the Elbow provide easy crossing. There was food and water there. It provided great shelter during the winter. The buffalo knew that it was shelter during the winter, so it provided hunting as well. And so where the Calgary Stampede and Stampede Park are situated have always been a gathering place. Fast forward quite a bit. 1875, Fort Calgary was established by the Northwest Mounted Police, and it was really established as an outpost in this area. We, of course, are situated just south of this location. 1883, the Canadian Pacific Railway arrived, and that is really when Calgary started to grow. There were probably about 500 people in the area when the railway arrived, but this will allow greater access to the region. In 1884, August of 1884, the Calgary and District Agricultural Society, our parent company, was formed. Just a year after the railroad arrived, 9 years after Fort Calgary was established, and it was formed to promote the agricultural potential of this region and encourage farmers from the east to move west, to come to Calgary. Now, I say that with full acknowledgement for the hardships and the injustices that were caused to Indigenous peoples, but that is why the Calgary and District Agricultural Society, our parent organization, was formed. Well, they realized right away they couldn't put on a fair, and a fair or a festival was really the way to promote agriculture at that time. They didn't have time to put one on in 1884, so what they did is they sent a rail car exhibit to the east. They loaded this rail car in partnership with the railway, Canadian Pacific Railway. They loaded it with the finest agricultural products from this region. Manitoba actually got in on this as well. And they sent it east so people could see the bountiful production that could be obtained in this region. So that was really their first initiative to promote agriculture in this region. I have to point out that it was in November of 1884, the town of Calgary was incorporated. So technically, the Calgary Stampede is older than the city of Calgary. We've been here from the very, very beginning, and we take great pride in that. Finally, in 1886, they hosted the first Calgary Industrial Exhibition. Now, that word industrial might throw some people, but at that time, industry was agriculture. That just as well say Calgary Agricultural Exhibition, because the industry was agriculture at that time. This first one was held at 6th Avenue and Center Street, if you're familiar with Calgary, so immediately south of the Bow Tower in an open field. And it's very small, but there's a little show ring set up there. So they showed cattle, they showed horses. They opened up entries to all types of livestock. They had actually had a snowstorm because this was held in October, so it kind of impaired entries. None of the sheep arrived that were entered, but that was okay because they also had a beautiful baby contest. And there were 3 babies in this contest, and none of the judges wanted to tell any of the parents their babies were ugly. So they took the sheep premium, they paid each baby a first place prize. So I appreciate that. This industrial exhibition was held on that site through 1888. And it wasn't just about livestock, it was crops as well. Really to promote how great the genetics, the production capabilities were in this region. In 1889, the District and Agricultural Society purchased what we now know as Stampede Park. They paid $235 to buy it from the Dominion, or the federal government at that time, 94 acres. And thank goodness that racetrack is not to scale. It wasn't that big. This is odd how someone who was plotting this could make a mistake like that. But after purchasing it for $235, the society took out a $3,000 mortgage to build that racetrack, to build, they called it a grandstand, it was more like a bleachers. They built an agricultural hall, and they built some lean-tos for cattle. And they later expanded that mortgage to $4,000. And they held the event from 1889 through 1894. Unfortunately, in 1895, there was an early ice and snowstorm. And basically none of the entries showed up. The society went broke. The land was foreclosed, but it wasn't used for something else, because when they purchased it from the Dominion government, there was a restricted covenant on the title that stated this land can only be used for an exhibition. So it was preserved. Ultimately, R.B. Bennett, future premier, purchased the land, sold it to the city of Calgary. The city of Calgary leased it back to the Agricultural Society, and that lease continues today. Most of the land we operate on today belongs to the city of Calgary, but again, it has that restricted covenant on it as well. And so there were no shows in 1895, 1896, 1897, or 1898, but in 1899 it was revived, and with the exception of the 2020 COVID cancellation, we've held a fair every year since 1899. This is a really important moment for Stampede Park and really for Alberta as well. The 1908 Dominion exhibition. This was a traveling national fair within Canada. And much like the Olympics, it was awarded to a particular city. Calgary was fortunate enough to get it in 1908. And it was quite the showcase of agricultural production. I'll show you some photos here in a second. This was really monumental because the city, the province, and the federal government all pitched in some grants, combined with their projected entry fees and admission fees from people who were coming. That gave them a budget of $145,000. That doesn't sound like much. That's $5 million in today's dollars. And they used that money to make improvements to the grounds that basically set the Calgary Stampede up for its future success. That's what the grounds looked like after the 1908. And you can see the racetrack's not as big as was shown there in 1891. That's what the grounds looked like. So some fantastic buildings. This was the industrial building. If you're familiar with the grounds today, this stood where the corral stood. This stood right beneath the giant skylight in the expanded BMO Center. And so it was well positioned, an absolutely beautiful building. This is where a lot of the crops and those types of exhibits were kept. Unfortunately, it burned down in 1931. I would have loved to have seen that building. If you can't tell, I'm kind of a history buff and I love old buildings. They built a brand new grandstand, and you can see in that bottom left, there's the parade of champions, the dairy cattle, the beef cattle that were shown at the Dominion exhibition that year, and that grandstand stood for several years until they relocated on the other side of the track. They built a lot of barns along the Elbow River. That, where you see that, and you see this beautiful pavilion and outdoor show ring, that's where the Saddle Dome stands today. So this really set them up with facilities to host a pretty grand agricultural fair at the 1980 Dominion exhibition, and of course subsequent industrial exhibitions as well. And then of course they set up a midway, because you have to have a midway. That's the midway looking toward Scotsman's Hill, and certainly there needed to be more attractions than just the agriculture. You got to put a little sugar on the pill to get people to take it, right? Something else that was really significant about that 1908 Dominion exhibition is it was attended by Guy Wiedeck and Flores Ledoux. They were vaudeville performers, Wild West performers. They met performing at a Wild West show in Chicago. They got married after 5 months. Wiedeck was from New York, Rochester, New York. Florence Ledoux was from Montevideo, Minnesota. And they both loved the West, and they were both trick ropers. In fact, Florence Ledoux retired after 31 years undefeated at trick roping. And while they were here with the Miller Brothers 101 Wild West show in 1908, they had this idea that would be a great place for a Western festival. We should do that. So they approached H.C. McMullen with the Canadian Pacific Railroad. And at that time, frankly, if you worked for the railroad, you were like an astronaut. You were pretty cool. And he said, you know, that's a good idea, but there's only 24,000 people in Calgary. I don't think we're ready for that yet. And so Wiedeck and Ledoux went about their tours with their Wild West show, and they were actually in Europe when they received a telegram from McMullen that said, you know, the population here is about 44,000 now. I think you could put on your Wild West show. And so in 1912, they returned, and they had this idea for a Wild West show. And they approached the industrial exhibition about using the grounds, and the industrial exhibition said, absolutely not. So what they did then, what Wiedeck and Ledoux did, is they approached the big four. Burns, Cross, Lane, and McLean. These were four ranchers and businessmen. And they agreed to each put up $25,000 to fund the first Calgary Stampede. And so with those funds, they put on this grand spectacle. And a big part of that was Indigenous participation, because Wiedeck was convinced you could not have an event that celebrated the West without the original inhabitants of the West. And so he went to Ottawa and he lobbied the federal government to allow Indigenous participation. Mind you, because of the Indian Act of 1876, it was illegal for them to leave their reserves. It was illegal to speak their languages, to practice their customs. He got permission, and 1,800 Indigenous people in full regalia led that first Calgary Stampede parade. Not only did they do that, they came to the park and they set up their teepees in a camp right beside a lot of attractions in the Midway, which is fantastic. We continue this today with Elbow River Camp, if you go into Elbow River Camp. So it was a huge success. 100,000 people attended this event September 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. That's a lot of people for a town that had 40-some thousand people in it. Huge success, huge financial success. Wiedeck goes to the Big Four and said, this was fantastic, let's do it again. And they said, nah, we're good. And the reason they said that is because you see that right there, the last Great West. They did not see this as a recurring event. They saw this as a farewell to the Western way of life, to the ranching way of life. They saw fences going up. They saw row crops going in. They were convinced that the Western way of life was vanishing, and they just wanted to throw a last hurrah. So they said, no, thank you. Well, Wiedeck, undeterred, he took it to Winnipeg. Did you know there was a Winnipeg Stampede? 1913, Winnipeg Stampede. Pretty much the same format. Drew about 60,000 people, moderately successful. There was an economic downturn right after that, and unfortunately World War I started. That was the end of the Stampede in Winnipeg. Wiedeck, undeterred, he took it to New York City. There was a New York City Stampede in 1916 at the Buffalo Speedway in New York City, and didn't do so well. Drew about 20,000 people. There are actually stories of rodeo cowboys being stranded because they didn't know how to get back home from there. So not a big success. And so Wiedeck thought, well, I'll just wait, see if I can revamp this elsewhere. Well, his opportunity arrived in 1919. But I put this up here first just to remind you that while that stampede was going on in September, Prior to that, June through July, late June, early July, there was an agricultural fair. So just a reminder, there was an agricultural fair going on between these stampedes. So 1919 was the opportunity. World War I had ended. WEDC goes to the Big Four, said we have to welcome our service members back with a big celebration. Let's do another stampede. They said absolutely. 140,000 people came. Pretty much a similar type of presentation as 1912. And it was a huge success. And WEDC said, let's keep doing this. And the Big Four said, nah, we're good. So there was no stampede in 1920. There was no stampede in 21 or 1922. And again, a reminder that the industrial exhibition was still occurring prior to those two stampedes. The 1919 industrial exhibition brags these new concrete grandstand and cattle pavilion. So there's the grandstand that actually stood through 1973. There's Victoria Pavilion and the agriculture building, the original structure, if you're familiar with Stampede Park, still there today. In fact, that's what it looks like today, pretty similar view. Now it has a facade on it and it has some improvements made to it, but we're operating in a 106-year-old building with our primary stalling. Stick a note in that. I'm going to return to that here in just a second. But you can see that even at that exhibition, they were drawing in things, auto races and bands and aviation stunts. Cars and airplanes were really big at that time. So some improvements that were made there. But again, no stampede, 1920, 1921, 1922. The agricultural exhibition began struggling financially in drawing crowds, drawing entries. They were probably about to go broke again for the second time when in 1923 they merged. The Calgary exhibition and Stampede. So the industrial exhibition, the agricultural show, the Stampede, the Western celebration, they merged into one event, and we've been that way ever since. So really, the glitzy, glamorous thing kind of bailed out the true grassroots, mission-driven thing. Not that Western heritage isn't a mission, but agriculture is certainly one of our missions as well. Two things I have to share about this. This was the advent of chuck wagon racing. Guy WEDC, to promote the 1923 Stampede, came up with this idea of chuck wagon racing. And he invited 6 chuck wagons, working chuck wagons from ranches in the area, and they came and they raced. And it was a similar race to what we have today. They would start in the infield, they'd run around the track, they'd come back, but the winner wasn't the first one across the line. The winner was the first one to stop, unload their stove, and light a fire. And so when smoke came out, if you're the first one to create smoke, you win. The problem is, 1924, they came back and their wood was soaked in kerosene and they packed their fireboxes with paper, and so then it was the first one back across the line. The interesting thing is, tied to that is the first Stampede pancake breakfast. There are over 200 of them during the 10 days of the Stampede now, the biggest and best ones put on by our volunteer committees. But what happened here is Wild Horse Jack Morton, the owner of one of these chuck wagons, thought, well, I need to promote this event. So he pulled his chuck wagon onto Stephen Avenue and they just started making pancakes for people. Come watch the chuck wagon races. That's how the pancake breakfast was born, was during that 1923 Stampede. And so it became the exhibition and Stampede. Interesting down here on this, you see Buffalo Barbecue. So the Banff Windermere Highway had just opened, so they wanted to tie that in, and that's still an attraction for out-of-towners. They'll come to the Stampede, they might spend a day in Banff. And so to celebrate that, they took 5 buffalo and they barbecued them. First come, first serve. Come get your buffalo at this event. So that brings you up, I'm not going to take you any further through history now, but that tells you agriculture truly is in our DNA, and that we have blended this agricultural mission with this broader attraction to draw people to us. And that's really the point I want to make with regard to that early history. So the future of agriculture. I'm certainly not going to lecture this group on the future of agriculture, but I want to point some things out, and I want to discuss how the Calgary Stampede can contribute to the future of agriculture. So the big question is, how will we sustainably feed nearly 10 billion people by the year 2050? So right now, about 8.2 billion people on the planet. Some estimates have it over 10. Most estimates have it in nines as far as billions of people by the year 2050. And for the most part, we're probably doing this with lesser land mass with the way that we're developing. Well, the answer to that is technological advancement. Clearly, we have to get more efficient at what we do. But we obviously have to be sustainable, and we obviously have to produce a safe and wholesome product. This is a list. I'm sorry if your favorite's not up here. But of course, precision or prescription agriculture using sensors, GPS, satellites, drones, to do what needs to be done in a particular area when it needs to be done. Autonomous machinery. Robotics, self-driving tractors, greatly increased efficiency. Biotechnology, genomics, genetic engineering. Genomics is one that's near and dear to me. My master's degree from Texas A&M is in animal breeding and genetics. I spent 1 year at Angus Genetics Incorporated before I came up here to the Calgary Stampede. It was a fantastic year because the beef on dairy indexes were rolled out into production while I was there. And we kicked off the global Angus evaluation while I was there as well with foot scores. Because we had Australian foot scores, we had US foot scores, we had Canadian foot scores, and now, 4 years later, they're production traits, carcass and growth traits, so you can actually compare through both traditional genetic evaluation, genomics incorporation, you can compare sires from Australia to Canada to the US. And pick out selection. So it was a great year to be there at Angus Genetics Incorporated. Controlled environment agriculture, so container growing, vertical growing, greenhouses, things of that nature. AI and machine learning will continue to impact agriculture and improve efficiency. And then of course blockchain for traceability, data capture as well. So technology is the answer. Now I have to point out though, because there are some things up there on that list that are scary to the average consumer. It's scary for them to think about those things. And I'll come back to that here in just a moment. I would say Canada is well positioned to feed the world. So when we think about nations who are able to help feed the world and meet that challenge that I had up there 2 slides ago, Canada is pretty well positioned. And I say that because there's arable land and fresh water. There's a strong agricultural production capacity. You can say that about a number of nations, the United States, of course, Brazil, Australia, India, China, Ukraine, if they're ever able to come out of their current challenges. But Canada is really well positioned. And it's interesting to think that with climate change and the warming of the climate, it might actually help Canada in making more land arable and usable and increasing the growing season, whereas in other areas, such as the US, particular regions, it's hurting them in that regard. Export-oriented economy. In other words, you're able to export. As far as exports from Canada, non-value-added exports, about 50% is exported on a dollar basis. So 50% is exported elsewhere. About 60% of that's going to the US. And of course, we all know the challenges there. And so it'd be great to not be so dependent on the US and open up other means of trade throughout the globe, but well positioned with an export-oriented economy. You think about India and China, they have to feed their people first. And so that becomes maybe an even greater challenge. They certainly export now, but that might become a greater challenge for them. Whereas Canada with 48 million people and all this production capability, there's great potential here to feed the world. Political and economic security. I'm going to put a check beside that, especially you think about relative to what's happening everywhere else in the world. The US is self-inflicted wounds with regard to this. Russia has created a self-inflicted wound with regard to this. That probably won't last forever, those two things, hopefully. But I'm going to put check mark next to that. Advanced ag tech capability and infrastructure. Well, I would say your presence here today proves that. There's a strong desire for utilizing technology to improve agricultural production in a sustainable manner. And then a skilled and educated workforce. There's a check mark next to that as well. We have a pretty educated workforce here, and we have the means to upskill laborers to fill these new jobs as they pertain to agriculture. So what role can the Calgary Stampede play? I've divided this down into three things. Bridging divides or gaps. Mark talked about gaps a moment ago, the gap between research and putting it in production. I'll talk about a couple of other gaps that we have. Developing a skilled and educated workforce, we can do that. And lastly, facilitating industry advancement. And I'll talk about ways that we can do that as well. So bridging the urban-rural divide. We do this through exhibits during the Stampede. We do it also in April, an event that's called Aggie Days. Stampede last year drew 1.47 million people. They came for that glitz and glamour for the most part that I pointed out, but it creates an opportunity for us to engage them and teach them about agriculture and where their food comes from and give them appreciation. If you think back to the first industrial exhibition in 1886, most of the people who attended that were probably directly tied to agriculture. They were no more than one generation removed from agricultural production. That's not the case today. They're 3-4 generations removed. And so we have a tremendous opportunity to teach them about agriculture, and when we're drawing 1.47 million. Aggie Days will put 20,000 people through there in 5 days, primarily school children that will come through there. Most of this is occurring in these that old 106-year-old barn that I talked about, also in the Nutrien Western Event Center. And a lot of this was created for kids. You see the kids milking the cow there. But I think what the organizers, when they started this activity in the city, as we call it, the parents had never seen it either. This educates the parents as well. Bridging the gap between agriculture and food. People don't make that connection. I mean, we've all heard about kindergartens being asked, where does hamburger come from? And the answer is McDonald's, right? We laugh at that, but it's kind of true. And so bridging that gap between agriculture and food so that they have an appreciation for where their food comes from, educating them on how their food is being produced. And then this is where we interact with the public that might be concerned about the use of technology. We have to be mindful that the people are coming through and the people we're engaging with these types of things, they're the current and future consumers that will either accept or reject the technology, and it's up to us to help educate them. They're also the current and future voters that will vote for legislators that will either be supportive of agricultural production or maybe not supportive of agricultural production. So we take this very seriously with regard to our education. And so when you think of agri-food and you link those two together, agriculture largely talking about the production side, food, the end product, this really links the entire value chain of agriculture, this agri-food term. And quite frankly, Calgary Stampede wants to be that hyphen. We want to make that connection for people and make sure they're educated on where their food comes from and they're appreciative of where their food comes from. Developing a skilled and educated workforce. I would say we primarily do this through our youth programs. And I say traditional programs up here because those are kids with an animal at the end of a halter or holding an animal, just like I showed you in that 1908 slide, the Parade of Champions. They've been doing this for well over 100 years. Now, there are better ways to market seed stock, cattle, than showing them in a show ring now. And we talked about that with genetic evaluation and genomics. But I would still argue this may be the best developmental opportunity for youth. 4-H, raising an animal. Because we all know that in the field of agriculture, just like in the field of medicine, if somebody doesn't do their job, something could die. There's tremendous responsibility that's put on these young people. They learn about work ethic and life skills that will serve them well. Hopefully they'll go into agriculture. But if they don't, they have an appreciation for agriculture and the skills they learn will support them. The one on the left, that's our steer classic during Stampede. That young lady in the middle is holding a calf from the OH Ranch. I'll talk about the OH Ranch here in a second. In fact, I'll talk about it now. The OH Ranch is 8,000 acres near Longview that was donated to the Calgary Stampede in 2012 by the Stevens family. And it began, traces back to 1883. And we run about 300 Red Angus and Angus commercial cows there. And 2 years ago, we started up a program called the OH Ranch Branded Beef Program. We selected 12 youth from Alberta and Saskatchewan. They came to the ranch on a Saturday in the fall, the last 2 years. I picked out the 15 best steer calves. We let them pick their calf, to take it home. They got a $1,000 check. They raised it, stayed in touch with us. They brought it back to the Stampede. They showed it at the OH Ranch branded beef show, and then they showed in the Steer Classic. And then they auctioned their steer in association with the International Auctioneers Competition. They got to keep 80% of that money. So they got a free steer, they got the feed, they got most of the money from the calf. We used the 20% for administration to conduct the program. Stampede School. So every year during the school year, for 4 days of a 5-day school week, we bring a 3rd or 4th grade class to Stampede Park. And they do a full curriculum for those 4 days. And they learn about agriculture and careers in agriculture. They also learn about indigenous relations. They learn about history of Calgary. They learn about really ecology and conservation. We're right there on the Elbow River. That's kind of a nice little lab. So this is a great program that we operate as well. The OH Ranch School. So the OH Ranch I just described, we send bus loads of kids down to the OH Ranch School. And they get to spend a day on an actual ranch. And they go out in the field, as you can see here. And they talk about early life in Calgary and history. They talk about Western heritage. They talk about agricultural production. They talk about conservation as well. So a great program there. And then Journey 2050 for older students, junior high and high school students. This is a computer simulation that really is designed for them to answer the question, how do we feed nearly 10 billion people by the year 2050? And they go through this. Who knows, maybe this sparks their interest in ag tech and being involved in agriculture. That's certainly the hope. Robot Rodeo started last year. So a robotics competition for youth. They actually came from all over North America, but we had an agricultural challenge where they received a Lego kit and they had to create a robot to conduct agricultural tasks as well. We need minds like this in the field of agriculture, no doubt. We hope to expand this as well, incorporate more local students. Youth Agricultural Public Speaking started last year. These kids are incredible. They get basically assigned a topic. They can pick from one of 5 topics as it pertains to agriculture. Obviously, technology is one of those. They research, they provide a speech associated with it as well. These are future politicians here. They're pretty impressive. And then I have to brag on this one, Dr. Weller. We just wrapped this up this last weekend, the first time we've ever done this. The Youth Veterinary Science Challenge in conjunction with the University of Calgary Vet Medicine program, our department, college. We had 112 kids apply this first year with pretty limited promotion, and we selected 50 of those. And this last Friday, they spent a day at the Spy Hill campus. They basically went to vet school for a day. They were divided into teams of 5. They were coached by second-year vet students. They scrubbed into the OR. They dissected a heart. They learned how to suture. They pulled a calf. They went and conducted some virology there. You can see on the microscope. And they resuscitated a dog dummy through CPR to the beat of Staying Alive by the Bee Gees. My guess is that's the first time they've ever heard that song, most likely. This is about as rich as it gets. And I have to be honest, I borrowed this from things we were doing in Texas at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo and other stock shows. This far surpassed the experience because of the richness, the fact they were actually in a vet school. Then on Saturday, they came to the Foothills campus and they went through a team competition on what they had learned, and they went through an individual competition on what they had learned. So new vets entering the field right here, which is awesome. And I'll conclude with this, facilitating industry advancement, meetings and conventions. We just completed, about 1 year ago today, this beautifully expanded BMO Center. Brings us to over 1 million square feet, 38 meeting rooms, 70,000 square feet of ballroom, world-class space. Now, I went to the World Agri-Tech Forum in San Francisco last year, along with Calgary Economic Development, and the mayor of Calgary went with me as well. I was blown away. But I left there thinking, why don't we have this in Calgary? I mean, I understand why it's there with Silicon Valley, but Silicon Valley, you're not going to be able to travel very far from the convention and actually see agriculture in action like you can here. We can take you out and let you step in it, for crying out loud. Get you out of that convention center. We need to get those conferences, those conventions here to Calgary. And that's one of our goals as we move forward, especially with this beautiful new meeting space. Coordinating stakeholder interactions. We see ourselves as an organization that can bridge gaps and bring stakeholders together. I'll give you an example how we did this during Stampede 2024. Bill C-355. Some of you are probably aware of it. It's basically designed to prohibit the air transport of horses intended for slaughter. Even though those horses are being traveled with the same protocols, policies, procedures as the highest dollar value jump show horses that you could see. Honestly, as a not-for-profit, we're probably not going to be vocal about this. Even though we're concerned, we also have another ranch, the Calgary Stampede Ranch, near Hanna, 2 hours east of here, 23,000 acres, 500 horses. That's where we raise the world-famous bucking horses. Be honest with you, horse slaughter is important to us because in some instances that is the most humane way to euthanize a horse, is to take it that way. So the consequences of this Bill C-355, which is still pending, by the way, we thought, well, we should do something. And so when Senator Black was here, we convened a group of stakeholders, both those in the show industry, horse show industry, who transport horses, Spruce Meadows. We also brought in an indigenous farmer who raises horses for Japanese slaughter. This is his business, and set him down with Senator Black so he could hear directly from these stakeholders what this bill would mean. So it's still pending, not sure how it's going to work out. It went through the House of Commons, it's still pending in the Senate, but I just share that as an example of things that we can do. We can be a convening place, and we can put people together to try and shape policy or any other number of issues. And then here's the big play. In the future, I mentioned our 106-year-old ag building. I love it, tied to history. Guy Wiedeck was in that building. That's pretty cool, right? Doesn't really meet our needs, doesn't meet the expectation of our exhibitors. I'd like to replace it. But I don't just want to replace it so we can stall horses and livestock and have shows in there. I want to build additional space. I want purpose-built facilities to partner with academia and industry, so that we are basically the ag hub. So a little over a year ago, Calgary Stampede, Olds College, Calgary Economic Development signed a memorandum of understanding to create an ag innovation hub. It's going to be a while before we build a building, and it's going to take some government support to do so. I want that hub to be on Stampede Park, right in the middle of Calgary. And I want to put it on display right there. You know, perhaps incubation space there for startups. But I also want our academic partners to be there. That photo that you see there is from Denver, the National Western Stock Show grounds. Some of you maybe have been there. Colorado State University, one of my alma maters, opened up a campus there. That is a vet clinic where people can come and sit there and watch a dog being spayed or any other number of procedures. They also have a test kitchen there where they take agricultural products and basically, voila, turn them into these fantastic dishes. They have hippotherapy there, so equine therapy. There's no reason we can't do this in Calgary. SAIT should have a test kitchen on our campus. University of Calgary Vet Medicine College should have space on our campus. Olds College should have space on our campus where they can teach everything from gardening to upskilling of the next generation workforce from those who maybe have passed their school age, for example. This, I think, could be really, really impactful, and it's really an important way that we can play a role in the future of agriculture. So that's kind of the big play. That's the future play that we would certainly like to pursue. With that, I'm going to close with this. If nothing else, I'm hoping that when you see something like this, as it pertains to the Calgary Stampede, you know there's a much deeper story than this. This is the sugar that goes on the pill. This is what brings people to us. This is what allows us to capture them and educate them on agriculture, expose them to Western heritage, because that's critically important to us as well. And if nothing else beyond that, as you walk out of here, I want you to realize that you, all of you in this room, have a partner right in the heart of the third largest city in Canada. So with that, I'll wrap it up. And if we have time for questions, I'd be happy to take those.